So the way that I always answer that is as early as it needs to be. So if you're even thinking of potentially wanting to buy a house and you think it might be a year away or 2 years away, it doesn't hurt to start that process just to see where you are right now. A lot of times too, there's a reason why someone might want to delay the process of purchasing, whether they don't have the down payment saved yet, so they want to save. That's fine. Or maybe there's things that they have to fix on their credit or that they need to pay off or want to pay off. That's perfect, but we can do the application and go through those tools so that you know exactly what you need to do to put you in your best position when the time comes for you to buy. So usually on average, I would find most people want to get pre-approved around 6 to 12 months before they think they want to buy. And in most cases, it's because they think they can't buy, and then they end up buying earlier anyway, because they realize it's more attainable than what they had originally thought.
You're listening to Realtor in Your Pocket podcast. Do you want a head start on buying, selling, or renting in Ottawa? You're in the right place. Every episode brings you great advice and insight that you can keep in your back pocket until you make your move. And now, here's your host, Nick Fundytus.
That clip that you just heard was from Kristin Stauffer, a mortgage broker with Dominion Letting here in Ottawa. You're listening to Realtor in Your Pocket, Ottawa real estate and advice. And today on the podcast, I'm interviewing Kristin as part of my home buyer series, part 1 of 7. This episode is all about the preparations required, the most important step, and Kristin plays a big part in that for her clients, as financing is one of the first and most important things to sort out as you buy a home. I'm Nick Fundytus, and as well as hosting this podcast, I'm a realtor at Royal LePage Performance Realty in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. Realtor in Your Pocket is a podcast dedicated to home buyers and sellers in Ontario. Each episode, I'll cover a topic that explains how something in my industry works in such a way that gives you the edge when buying or selling a home. Enjoy the show, and if you know someone who could use a realtor in their pocket for advice, share it with them. A 5-star review on iTunes never hurt either, and you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Enjoy the show. Okay. So I'm on the podcast with Kristin Stauffer today from Dominion Lending Centers. She and I have worked together on many, many files and helped a lot of clients. And I'm always very pleased when I know that she is the one that is serving my clients, because she serves with a really high level of integrity, a lot of skill, and I sincerely cannot recommend her enough. So I'm pleased to have her on today. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you a few questions, and today's episode, we're talking about the preparation stage. So the very beginning of a buyer's journey, the things that are going to set them up for success. Okay. Because way back when I was a summer camp counselor, I remember one of my bosses saying to me, when you wake up in the morning, you should be planning to figure out how to get those kids in bed at night. And that was something in terms of like setting yourself up for success that I always liked. And with clients, I find that if you can get them on the right track in the morning, you're going to help get them to bed at the end with the goal being that they've got their new place and they're happy and they found the right place.
Right.
So you're a mortgage broker, and I find that a lot of home buyers, especially new ones, don't know what that means. Right. How would you explain what it is that you do?
For sure. So essentially, as a mortgage broker, we're there to act as the middleman between you and the money that you need. So the mortgage that you need to acquire. And that mortgage can be from your bank, from a credit union, from lenders that you may not have ever heard of. And our job is just to fit you with that. So we don't work for one particular lender or one bank. And our goal and our role is really, we work for you. So you're our boss, and the client is the one who tells us what it is that they need based on, what it is that they're looking for, what their goals are. And we just kind of match that up to make sure that they're getting the mortgage that makes sense now and going forward in the future.
Okay, straightforward enough. So what's the main difference? Now, the two places I find people will gravitate towards is if they know about mortgage brokers, usually they're talking to a mortgage broker, or, everybody grew up with a bank account. So what's the difference between you and the guy at the bank? Who I usually find is 27 years old. He's named Taylor, and he's got like every time.
Yeah, there are a lot of them. So the main difference being is, so mortgage brokers, we are licensed. So we do have to have licenses through FSRA, so the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario. That means we have a due diligence to not only make sure that we're doing the best job for you, so for the client, but we have a big role when it comes to disclosure and transparency. So our job really is to take that whole big scary looking contract of the mortgage and show you what you need to know from it. So we're licensed. We do that in order to make sure that we can show you everything and that the clients know exactly what it is that they're looking at. Banks, they only work for a bank. So anyone who is at a bank employee, they are serving the interests of the bank themselves. And that's the only lender they can go to. So their choice is very limited. And because they're not licensed, just the disclosure rules are very, very different. So things that, you know, as brokers, we have to be able to explain and fully show what everything's going to look like. Banks don't necessarily have to do that. And sometimes there's just a lot of misinformation about what type of mortgage you're really getting until it might be too late. So.
Okay. I'll play devil's advocate for a second, because as you know, I'm a big fan of mortgage brokers, and especially you as a mortgage broker. But let's say that I'm arguing for someone going to the bank. Why do people choose the banks? Like, why is that a destination that a lot of people end up?
For sure. So the main reason that we often see is just because if they've been in lately, as you know, if you go to a teller, they ask you a lot of questions. So why you're moving money, where the money's going. So, you know, you may have been asked, well, do you want to do a pre-approval? So just for ease, and you're in the bank and here's the option to talk to someone. Some people just like the brick and mortar too. They just want to know they can walk in somewhere and talk to someone about their mortgage, which is great. And then others just want everything all tied together. So logging onto your bank profile, you see your checking account, your RRSPs, your mortgage, everything within there. So some just like the convenience of having all of that showing all together at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super. All right. So today's episode, as you know, is all about the preparation for a home search. So I actually advocate that someone planning to purchase a home come and talk to you before they come and talk to me. Since you really help frame the financial picture and give the buyer an idea of what's possible, but also what's realistic. So what should a potential home buyer have prepared before they come to you, before they sit down or make that first call, if ideally?
Sure. So really it doesn't have to be too much. It can be an easy process, because there shouldn't be a lot that they have to really know and prepare, because that's what we're for. So having a good idea of, you know, of your income structure. Some people don't know, you know, their guaranteed hours or how they're actually compensated. So knowing what kind of income you have, knowing your assets and where they are, just so we can see where the money would be coming from for down payment. And ideally having an idea about your credit too. So even things like that, if you're not sure about your credit, then we check it and we go through those options. Or, you know, if you're not sure about how much money you have in the bank, then we go and we get all those bank records anyway. So you don't have to know how much you want to buy for, or, you know, where you want to live yet, but having a good idea too on what your monthly budget is going to be, that's really important too, because that comes down to probably being the most important thing that you want to consider when buying your first home.
Yeah, I agree. If you're not sure about what your budget is in the end, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, because there's going to be places that are pretty exciting to you, but if they're not realistic, that's not going to end in a happy result. So something you said there about that you don't even have to have a home in mind, that really ties in well to the next question here, which is just how early in the process is it helpful to get in touch with you? Right. When you are starting, like, do you do it when you're starting to look at homes, a year before, when you have an offer on a home? What's the best time?
Correct. So the way that I always answer that is as early as it needs to be. So if you're even thinking of potentially wanting to buy a house and you think it might be a year away or 2 years away, it doesn't hurt to start that process just to see where you are right now. A lot of times too, there's a reason why someone might want to delay the process of purchasing, whether they don't have the down payment saved yet, so they want to save. That's fine. Or maybe there's things that they have to fix on their credit or that they need to pay off or want to pay off. That's perfect, but we can do the application and go through those tools so that you know exactly what you need to do to put you in your best position when the time comes for you to buy. So usually on average, I would find most people want to get pre-approved around 6 to 12 months before they think they want to buy. And in most cases, it's because they think they can't buy, and then they end up buying earlier anyway, because they realize it's more attainable than what they had originally thought.
Okay. So two interesting things that you said in there. Number one was basically even if it's a long ways away, you don't mind getting that call.
Not at all.
Okay, cool. And then number two, one thing I've noticed over the years is that even somebody who's not quite ready, like they might have reasons why it's not time for them to buy yet, you're okay with saying to them, to have that conversation with them. And if the result is maybe now is not the best time, maybe you have a little bit of work to do on your finances and kind of give some advice on how you can get ready, that's okay with you too to have that conversation.
Absolutely. I love that conversation. I actually like setting that up just because I find that everyone loves Google and to try to find things out on their own. But I mean, having a personalized, in-depth look at your own finances and knowing exactly what you can do, it can just provide a lot of extra motivation to follow through, knowing that once you do this, now you'll be exactly where you want to be.
Okay. Yeah, I like that too. And I know that when you say, okay, I need to save this much every month for the next 6 months, and I'm going to, and then, oh yeah, actually when I do that, I can see that I've got a down payment, what I need to do. That feels good. And it gives you that extra motivation each month to maybe just put a little bit extra in there. So, now how does a mortgage broker get paid, and how's that different from a bank? Because that's something that somebody's going to sit down with you, and it's going to be on their mind for sure, because they always think about that when they're sitting down with a realtor, but people are always too shy to ask. So I have to just go tell them.
Yeah.
So how do you get paid?
Yeah. So same thing. That's always one of the first things that I address is there's never a cost to the client. The only time that there's a cost to the client is if it's, a difficult mortgage, so a private mortgage. But if you fully qualify for a mortgage, you're not paying anything for the service of a mortgage broker. So the way it works is that mortgage brokers are compensated from the lender. So whoever you end up getting your mortgage through, that's how we get paid. And it gets paid through our brokerage, and then we get the split from that. So that is just very different from the way that banks work. Bank employees, usually they're on one of two kind of options, where they're either salaried employees and they, do mortgages, investments, a lot of other things with it, or they could just be straight commission, but again, only working for that one particular bank as opposed to multiple options.
Okay. And then everybody knows you got to go get a pre-approval. What's a pre-approval? What is it actually?
Sure. So a pre-approval is that's when we would go through the entire qualification of what you can afford based on everything that you're bringing to the table. So how much income you have to show that you can support the mortgage payments. How much of a down payment do you have, or will you have when the time comes? So that's where it's never too early. If you don't have the down payment now, but you will, whether you're getting it as a gift or, an inheritance, we can account for that. So knowing how much you can afford, and not your top number. We never want to know what the maximum is, because again, that's where we're not talking about budget, which should always be the focus, is what your actual monthly costs are going to look like. So the pre-approval allows us to go through that to make sure that you are pre-approved and that you're qualified for that mortgage that you're looking for. The other thing that it allows us to do is to secure interest rates. So rates can be held for up to 4 months, so 120 days. That way, if rates are about to go up, lock you in at the low rates that we have now. And if they go up, then you're protected for that time frame if you buy within that period. But it just gives you that knowledge and that comfort of knowing that everything's been looked at, you're good to go, and all that needs to be approved after that is just the property.
Right on. Okay, so what are the costs of buying a house these days?
Sure. So if you're a first-time home buyer, there are still incentives for that. So in Ontario, there's the land transfer tax rebate. And so that's $4,000 off the cost of the land transfer tax. You do have the ability to use the home buyer's plan as well for your RRSPs if you want to withdraw money from there in order to use it for your down payment. But in general, the costs that you would want to consider above and beyond the down payment that you have are what's called closing costs. And those are the ones that can vary depending on the time of year when you buy and what type of property you buy. But a good rule of thumb is that if you budget around 2% of the purchase price, that's pretty much what you want to be able to have available on closing costs, and then the down payment on top of that. So minimum down payment is still 5% for a home purchase under 500,000, and it looks like it's probably going to stay that way. There's going to be no changes to that.
Okay, great. Now, I made a typo in the next question, so you're gonna have to wing your answer a little bit on this one.
Sure.
Now, I said what I wrote is there any incentive for a client to work with one realtor as opposed to another? What I actually meant to ask was, is there any incentive for a client to work with one mortgage broker as opposed to another? Like what's available? What are the competitive differences between different mortgage brokers?
For sure. So when it comes to mortgage brokers, it really comes down to who they work for. So, what type of a company they work for. Is it large? Is it small? Because that's going to dictate the kind of access they have to lenders. So almost every broker will have access to the same types of lenders, but the types of discounts and the types of exceptions or even turnaround time, things like that can be very different broker to broker. So knowing that and knowing who you're working with that way and what kind of service you're going to get. And really it would just be a matter of response time too. As I'm sure you know, response time in something like this, especially when it comes to purchasing a house, is pretty key. So you want to have someone who's going to be attentive and be able to get back to you as soon as possible when you're looking to purchase.
Yeah. Well, and especially at those stress points where, like, if everything is going smoothly, the response time doesn't seem like it's such a big deal. But if something comes up, that's where the stress point, that's where it makes a big difference. Like, there have been times in the past where I've finally been able to, I see that there's 5 messages on my phone from a client. I just got off the ice at curling or something like that, and something weird has gone wrong. But one of the first things I put, or that I hear in my voicemail was your voicemail. You know the client I'm talking about. And one of the first things I got in my voicemail was a voicemail from you saying, "Hey, I already talked to this client. Hey," because he called me right after he called you. "We got it sorted out." Yeah. So, to know that he was able to reach you and that I wasn't having a fire at 11 p.m., on a Tuesday night was a big deal, because it meant that client was really happy that he was being listened to and he was being served. In the end, it was like a non-issue that came up, but he was very glad to know that somebody was listening.
Yeah. And that's really what I think it comes down to, is just making sure that person is really there for your best interest. Our job is to work for the client, and we need them to know that they're our number one. Mm-hmm. And, everyone's different in how they handle everything. So, especially stress too. Oh yeah.
True colors come out then.
Absolutely.
What does a buyer's first meeting with you look like?
So really the first meeting is where we would go through the pre-approval. And, the pre-approval is where we look at the qualification and the affordability and everything. But there's so much more to that. So, what you can afford and what your plans are, what your goals are is such a small part of it. What could happen, or, what do you anticipate to happen? Do you work for global affairs and could you be posted overseas? Or, is there something where this house that you're buying may not work for you in 3 or 4 years and you have to be able to port your mortgage? There's things like that sometimes, the buyer isn't thinking of, but that's our job, is to think of that and to make sure that everything's been presented properly.
Yeah, you've been in that situation, in that room many times before. So you've got the advantage of years of experience being able to say, "Hey, here's some stuff you might not have thought of that we're," or just asking questions to help the buyer think of that.
Yeah, to bring it out. Exactly.
All right. So what kind of, well, connected to that, what kind of mistakes do you see home buyers making these days, especially new ones who might not have been through the process before?
Right. So, I mean, when it comes to the mortgage side of things, I mean, the biggest one, or the number one that I always encounter, is just the actual cost of what it is they want to buy. So
Okay.
often I find that an online calculator has been used, qualification calculator. So you plug in your income, plug in your debts, and that's great. It shoots out what you can afford, and so you can afford $450,000. The problem with those calculators is that it only gives you your mortgage amount on a monthly basis that you have to pay, and the mortgage amount is just one piece of it. So by the time you take into account everything else that you have to pay, your property taxes, your utilities, your home insurance, that's all factored into it as well. And we want to be able to make sure that that's being taken into consideration. So even though you can be approved for a lot or more than maybe you should be, it's looking at the whole picture and making sure that you know everything of what it's going to cost you. And I always like to talk about how, if you're buying a house and if you've never owned a home before, a trip to Canadian Tire because you have to pick up some garbage cans and a rake and a shovel seems like nothing. But when you have to do that every month for the next year, a couple $100 a month, that adds up pretty quickly. And for not really exciting stuff, you still don't have anywhere to sit in your house.
Yeah, the
but,
Home Depot tax.
You have weeds in your front lawn. So, but yeah, so just going through all of that and making sure that the knowledge is there to know above and beyond what you have to pay on a monthly basis.
Okay. Now let's suppose that there's a home buyer and they're talking to 3 different mortgage professionals. So like you and a couple of different banks or something like that. What are some smart questions that they should be asking so that they know they've got the right person?
Sure. So, I mean, one thing that you would want to ask is, what kind of mortgage would probably be best for you, and just to kind of gauge what that answer is going to be. So I find a lot of times if that answer goes to rate, or how much, what the interest rate is going to be, or it should absolutely be fixed because of where the markets are, that's probably not the best choice at this point. Just because there is so much that goes into a mortgage above and beyond interest rate itself. So making sure that that person really is working for you and is going to ask you all of those questions to make sure that you are getting the mortgage that you need.
Okay.
Also making sure that you can make changes as you go along. So getting pre-approved, and especially if the process will take 6 months, a year, or however long it's going to take, what you decide or how you want to proceed to start, it may not be how you want to end up. And you want to make sure that that person's going to be able to make changes for you. So you want start off with, a mortgage from your bank, but then you changed your mind and you wanted a different type of mortgage. Knowing that you could make those changes and have those options is really important. And then again, what we've talked about too is just making sure that broker, that mortgage specialist, can deal with multiple different lenders and work with more than a couple. So there are some that just stick to 1 or 2 because that's what they know and that's what they're comfortable with. But sometimes it's not about us and how we operate. It's about the client and what kind of mortgage they need and what makes sense there.
Excellent. And then what's something that clients often forget about?
And so really that would just be everything that you need to account for fees and costs associated with borrowing and with purchasing a home. So I find a lot of times when you add up all of the costs together and you just do one lump sum, it doesn't seem so bad. But when you break it down and you add up everything, and especially at the lawyer's office, they charge 28 cents for paper clips, and it seems like a lot when they're lining everything up. But just knowing that they know that overall cost and not to be shocked by all of the other things that come up. We may need an appraisal for your purchase, and that could be $300, $350. Well, if that's necessary, we want to make sure that we have that money set aside for it. Is the lender going to cover the cost? So things like that we want to consider.
Sounds good. And then one little service for you we want to do here is that I'm sure there's all kinds of questions that you get all the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, what are those questions you get all the time? And we're going to say, what's your answer to those questions?
Sure. So for sure, the number one question is what's the best rate? So what's the best rate right now? And there is literally no answer for that. So the difference between a fixed rate, a variable rate, or whether you're buying with 5% down, 20% down, it doesn't matter. Just because rate is one small piece of it. What goes into the mortgage and what the terms and conditions are can end up being much more costly in the end than saving, 0.05 off of an interest rate. Mm-hmm. So that for sure is the number one question is best rate, which will get a very lengthy, wordy message from me as to what that is. And there will never be a rate involved.
Sounds good. What's the next question?
So the next one would be, why do you need so much information and documentation? So to apply for a mortgage in Canada, there is a lot of information that you need to supply. And long story short, Canada's really good at cutting down on fraud. And the reason being is because we ask for so much. So the government has rules in place for, all the documentation that we need to ask for income, for down payment. And it's not a matter that we don't believe you. It's just we need to prove it so that our housing market can remain strong. So,
yeah.
Okay. And then the other one that I get a lot too is with respect to down payment. So a lot of times I've already told, you need to save up your down payment and we need to show 90-day proof history of where that money has been. But when you buy a house, people really want to give that money right away to buy the home. And so, but that only comes right before closing at the lawyer when that's given.
And then you said the last question there is, why didn't I do this earlier?
Yeah. And that's, again, going back to when should I apply for a pre-approval? And that's whenever you're thinking that for sure of buying is in your future, now is a great time to do it. Because anytime you're armed with information and you know what you can do or what you should be doing, like we said, it's just going to give you that much more confidence to make sure that you can reach your goal of purchasing a home. So yeah, it's never too early to start the process.
Well, I agree with that 100%. Going back to full circle to where we started this podcast today, which of course the purpose of this is to arm people with information so they can make good decisions. And I think that starting with a call with you or an email to you is probably a really good foot to set out. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today. And I just tell you how much I appreciate it. I know that you and I have known each other for quite a number of years now, but I continue to be impressed, through the years. And I'm always pleased when you're the other person on the line, the other person on the team when we're serving a client together. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nick.
That's the show for episode 5. In upcoming episodes, I'll be continuing the homebuyer series and interviewing some great professionals from around Ottawa. A big thanks to Kristin for coming on the show today. I met Kristin very early in my career, and what has always impressed me about her is that she works very relationally with her clients, which really resonates with me. She's an excellent educator, and I've seen her answer clients and occasionally my questions at all hours of the day, and patiently while she's doing it. She saved more than one of my clients from unexpected circumstances, and I certainly trust her with my own family and my own clients. Thanks also to my wonderful marketing admin, Stephanie Ross, who helps produce and promote the show. She helps to keep me on schedule and make sure that our listeners can find us. Thanks to you for listening and subscribing. I hope that wherever you are, you're staying home, staying healthy, and staying safe. This has been Realtor in Your Pocket podcast. I'm Nick Fundytus.